So help me God.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Here's the thing. The ANC has been governing South Africa for almost 30 years. When you want to judge the performance of a party that has been in power for almost 30 years, of what they did over that period, and I can assure you, the record is terrible. They have collapsed public education, they have collapsed health, they have collapsed security, they have collapsed the economy.
We used to boast that we have delivered water, but the taps have run dry. You can't boast about supply of electricity anymore. Why? Because there's load shedding.
Yeah.
So basically the ANC has undone some of its key successes over time. And that's mainly due to corruption.
That while we have been doing it for 28 years, it is not the same people that were doing it for 28 years.
It's the same party?
It is the same party, but the party deploys different cadres from time to time.
We often see this as a victimless crime, but we are sorely mistaken. That happened with our money that could have improved the lives of South Africans, which goes back to the promises and the hopes and the dreams in '94.
But let's ask a question. When did you start seeing graduates standing on street corners in their academic gear? It was during the Zuma years. That is the depth of despair and a moment of reflection where we all need to say this far and no further.
But the state capture was one of the biggest corruption scandals in South Africa's democracy because of the nature of what it was. And it's estimated that basically at least $6 billion or so. So imagine that money that could have been used to improve people's lives.
They want to live like millionaires in the suburbs and enjoy all the benefits. They forget about the life, the grinding poverty in informal settlement in shacks, because the leaders don't actually experience that on a daily basis.
Young people like Nkele Padi, desperately trying to eke out a living and a future from Video Informal Settlement northwest of Johannesburg.
And nothing has gotten better. Everything has gone worse. So it's more tougher now to get jobs, to travel around, to get information.
Many of the residents rely on communal taps and there's no proper sanitation. They live surrounded by filth.
We don't get water regularly. We don't get people to come fetch the dustbins. And this truck driver comes in. I'm like, why didn't you come in last week? And they're like, because they don't pay us.
People here are disillusioned.
We need clinic, we need school, we need jobs, we need proper roads. Because even if you get sick at night, the ambulance don't come inside of these shacks.
I-career yabantwana bethu future ye-youth yethu manje ayisahambi kahle, ayisafani na before. Abantwana bahlala etratini, abantwana babhema amanyawupe, abantwana babhizi ngama-hapless.
Councillors are coming, leave the term, go, leaving this place like this.
The story is the same across the country.
Children are dying of malnutrition in the Eastern Cape in numbers. Why are they dying? Because the parents are so used to being hungry, they don't understand what malnutrition is in a child. So the children stay at home, and by the time they go to the clinic and get referred to the hospital, it's too late, they die. Because the parents think it's quite normal to starve, to be emaciated, to lose weight. Now how do you deal with a crisis like that?
So if we're going to look at a scorecard now, do you believe that the ANC has fulfilled promises that were made in 1994?
We have created policies that provide for social housing. That ensures that when you are unemployed, qualifies for a house and are on the list and had followed all processes of the government and have met the necessary means test, you are then given the RDP houses.
In July this year, the president acknowledged that the situation is dire at the ANC policy conference.
That we need to undertake extraordinary and urgent measures to accelerate inclusive growth, create employment, and alleviate poverty.
The leaders of the ANC who claim to lead the people no longer live with the people. There has been a political airlifting of the leadership from communities into suburbs. So you are an activist, very vocal, you live among black people. You get a position in the provincial government. The next day you leave Soweto. You go and live in Sandton. So they have completely lost touch.
When you come to government, you come for one purpose, to serve the country. Unfortunately, in the present time, people are coming to serve themselves.
This in a country with rampant unemployment.
This economy has to grow sustainably for the next 20, 30 years at an average of more than 3.5% to 4% for us to have a fighting chance of breaking the back of this quagmire that we are in. By that I mean poverty, unemployment and inequality.
We have a debt burden spiraling out of control.
That money will have to be repaid. And when it has to be repaid, that's where you are going to face some very tough decisions to make, including some of them having to cut back on things like social welfare.
But the ANC finds comfort in the fact that as a country, we are not alone.
What is being experienced by South Africa today is being experienced by all other countries. All countries all other third world countries are experiencing the problems that South Africa is experiencing.
But they're not the most unequal country in the world, we are.
Well, there's quite a number of things that we have done. We've introduced affirmative action policies, BEE.
It's time to dump race-based affirmative action in South Africa, given the damage the policy is causing to poor.
BEE is broken. I'm not against any kind of people being assisted in various ways, but people should be assisted because they need help, not because of the color of their skin, because then we are going to help a person who comes from Sentin, but just because of the color of their skin, you are helping them. But you are really not making any change.
All of these policies and many others were attempted at making sure that we could create an equal society. It is going to take time before we get to a point where
But you see the frustration, right?
Well, we understand that, and
when there's no food to eat.
That's why in meeting the populists halfway, we make sure the things I've outlined earlier on, that at school, these young ones who come from indigent families could be able to be given food.
But this while our tax base is dwindling and unsustainable.
7 million people's taxes can't fix up 65 million people. To expand the tax base, you need to create jobs. You need to create opportunities. And when that happens, of course, the tax base should get bigger.
Our state-owned entities, which for years have been black holes for taxpayer money and teetering on collapse.
There is a very real risk of having to implement stage 6 load shedding.
Andrew Trader has been given a poison chalice to fix what was left for 14 years or 13 years of layers of mistakes. Eskom didn't have a problem. Eskom was stolen in the daylight. Eskom was politically destroyed.
The end result is that South Africans have been left in the dark. The fact is that you've had a lot of SOEs that have been virtually cleaned out. ANC members were around. I'm just asking a question that when ANC members see other ANC members behaving badly, what happens?
Well, the answer I will give will sound like a tired answer because I've said it before. The refinement of our own policies, the lessons that we'll have learned. Because if you draw on lessons coming out of what will have happened in a particular administration and you identify weaknesses, you are duty bound to make sure that the way forward does not rehash or repeat that which undermined public confidence. Of course, the population has grown. The economy has not performed as well as we would have loved to. We have not taken full advantage of our mineral endowment.
Whose fault is that? Whose problem is that? The fact that unemployment is at its highest level right now? Whose fault is it that we are one of the most unequal countries in the world? Our economy is in trouble. We have a power crisis. We have a water crisis. There's still many people who live in shacks. Are you proud as the ANC? Have we done right by our people?
The ANC has got noble and best policies. And what policies of the ANC require is nothing but leadership.
The dominance of the ANC over the years has turned out to be what poisons the democracy, firstly, and secondly, what poisons the ANC itself.
So my answer is straightforward. The ANC cannot govern. All the ANC knows is to break things up.
Despite the swirling controversy and corruption allegations, Jacob Zuma was elected president of the ANC in December 2007.
I'm called upon to lead this multi-class organization and ruling party.
They saw Jacob Zuma as their leader of the criminal gang, and they were proud to install him because they knew that once they have him at the helm, they would have the license to loot at the lower structures with impunity.
That's when we should have started seeing that, there is some serious problems heading our way. First of all, you have a man that has a very big cloud hanging over his head, who's been chosen to lead an organization.
The cloud was there first.
Yes.
2007 told us that the crass criminal element in the ANC had taken over the entire organization.
And then in 2009, he was elected president.
I will be faithful to the Republic of South Africa.
So what did he do? He then said, I'm going to feed them the soft porridge they want. Each time I stand up, I'm going to promise them that we are very serious about fighting corruption. And that's exactly what he did. So if you look at all the leaders of the ANC from 1994 up to him, he is the leader who spoke against corruption the most. But he was the most corrupt of them all.
To eradicate corruption, decisively defeat corruption.
So it was a way of pacifying society. In other words, talking left, walking right.
Well, because he knew the NPA was already investigating him as part of the investigation into Shabir Shaik. And it was in his interest to disable the NPA, to make the NPA inefficient, to deny it of stability, of leadership. And he did that successfully for a while. In fact, at some point, the NPA was acting as if there is Defense Counsel, refusing to under Nomgcobo Jiva, refusing to release certain information on time to court when the DA wanted to review and set aside the decision not to prosecute him.
The first day in office, he began to make moves to remove good prosecutors, to remove good police officers at the top, and replace them with mediocre prosecutors, mediocre leadership in the police, mediocre leadership in the intelligence, in order for him and his gang to steal without being punished.
But if you go back to 2007 and the ANC's National Elective Conference at Polokwane, where the decision was taken to disband the Scorpions, the Directorate of Special Operations, that was the most public display of the fact that they did not want to fight corruption.
The Scorpions, in the circumstances, will be dissolved, and the organized crime unit of the police will be phased out, and a new amalgamated unit will be created.
Every single initiative, every single program became a tool to repurpose for the benefit of an elite few. And so what that came with was the dismantling of state institutions. That state capture came with a flip side, and that was having to dismantle state institutions to get easier access on state resources.
It set the scene for Nkandla Gate and opened the door to state capture.
The fire pool and swimming pool is a strategic asset useful for firefighting.
We're going to draft water from the pool and we're going to relay it into the fire engine.
It was a case of direct theft. You can't even say it's corruption complicated. Public money gets deployed in Nkandla.
What was it like, watching Nkandla, that scandal break in Parliament, and watching this kind of narrative around state capture?
The first article I ever read about Nkandla was in the Mail and Guardian. 250 million for security upgrades. We fired the parliamentary questions in and started tackling this issue.
The fact that the government is spending 250 million rand to upgrade not a presidential house, but the president's own house.
Then the Guptas showed up on our radar when their wedding party landed irregularly at Waterkloof Air Force Base.
A lot of that time was like, what? Like, what is happening? So the Guptas were a particular phenomenon, and everything from their interference in the SOEs, they're trying to get the Johannesburg-Mumbai route cancelled by SAA so they could take it over. They're using public institutions like their own stomping ground. You know, they're summoning cabinet ministers to Saxonwald.
There is a temptation to call it the 9 wasted years, but what that does then, it plays into a narrative of it was all bad or it was all good. The reality of it, the Zuma years was the kleptocracy.
But in Zulu you say, "Awuna mahloni," like you have no shame about your extravagances with public money and your abuse of the system.
My analysis is that the Guptas did not invent state capture. It would have been impossible for the Guptas as foreigners to come to South Africa and crack through the system. I mean, if you look at our architect, the constitution, the way it's drafted. So they didn't have to crack through it. They have to find existing methods that people were already using to eat public money.
We were able to lodge complaints with the public protector. We were able to take up these issues in parliament. We were able to impeach, try again to impeach, go to the constitutional court to win the right to impeach, all of these things.
But it was madness, right? You were sitting there in parliament when you had Zuma making jokes.
Giggling,
Kandla, all of that.
Everyone laughs. He's charismatic. Charisma isn't a qualification for governance.
Nkandla.
We will never feel proud about instances of state capture as they played themselves out at the Zondo Commission. Recommendations have been made and the relevant authorities are looking into that.
I am attending to the Commission's recommendations and observations on members of the executive against whom adverse findings were made.
Despite overwhelming evidence and countless scandals, the ANC stands by Zuma.
President Zuma has never been convicted of any act of corruption.
So what are you saying? You're saying, despite everything around former President Jacob Zuma, until he's found guilty in a court, the ANC is going to wait and then make a pronouncement. Is that what we're saying?
Well, the ANC is an organization of process. Even if it was not President Zuma, even if it was just one Refugee Moratlegi who's a branch member of the ANC out in Krugersdorp, the ANC will still have pronounced itself in the very same way. Even our own National Executive Committee of the ANC.
But you see the problem.
No, let me speak, because I don't know how a process becomes a problem.
The Commission wants the former president to be declared in contempt of court and sent to jail.
Straight after Ramaphosa was elected ANC president, there was talks about the removal of Jacob Zuma. Obviously, he did not want to leave office before his term ended in 2019, but it was very clear that it would be an untenable situation and that Ramaphosa had to take over the governing of the country. And so there was these back and forth negotiations that were going on to install Ramaphosa as president, but before that, obviously, to get Jacob Zuma to step aside.
I have therefore come to the decision to resign.
Jacob Zuma long maintained that the ANC had told him that he had done nothing wrong. And the way they cushioned him, even in his removal, was that they did not point any fingers to him. It was a politically managed situation. You'd never find a scenario where Cyril Ramaphosa ever called out his predecessor Jacob Zuma or put the blame on him.
But you have to backtrack to how Cyril Ramaphosa was brought in as deputy president way back in 2012 to understand the dynamics within the party and why the president has been quiet on key ANC leaders accused of corruption.
At the ANC's Mangaung conference, Kgalema Motlanthe decided to contest Jacob Zuma. And so there was an effort then to say, who can we bring in to be Zuma's deputy? And there was an effort then to bring Cyril Ramaphosa, who at the time was in business, he was a billionaire. And so there was an effort to say, let's bring him back into politics and make him the deputy president. So there was a discussion between Ace Magashule, Zweli Mkhize. These were Zuma lieutenants at the time. He will appease business, but at the same time, he'll never really be a challenger to Zuma because he does not have this political muscle, as it were.
That's what happened to Cyril Ramaphosa. Cyril Ramaphosa knew that there are certain characters you can't touch in the party because if you touch them, you are going to bring about your own downfall. Ace Magashule and people like that, it took time, by the way, for Ace Magashule to be dealt with. But if you look at the whole party, there are many elements, many ace makashules who are still in the system, and they cannot be touched, because those people are the ones who run the party.
The president has reaffirmed the step-aside rule.
Ramaphosa was recently lauded for his step-aside policy in an effort to root out corrupt officials.
Those of our cadres who are indicted to appear in a court of law would then be asked to step aside. If they don't step aside, they will be temporarily suspended in terms of the relevant prescripts of the ANC constitution.
So it becomes a policy of the ANC that if you have stolen public money, you get expelled. And there's no way you are allowed to contest leadership, not even leadership. You are not allowed membership.
But the step-aside rule is basically, we don't want you, you must go rule. That's what it means. But they're calling it step-aside rule because it sounds better.
Yes, it sounds better. But the question is, does the ANC have the guts to implement it? Who will be left in the leadership?
But in the midst of the Phala Phala scandal, questions are being asked about whether Ramaphosa will fall on his sword.
We want an explanation of the money in the mattress and pillows of Cyril Ramaphosa today.
Phala Phala scandal hangs over the president's head simply because it strips him from that persona that he tried to maintain of this clean president. It now levels the playing fields in some way.
He knows that as South Africans, we don't matter. What matters is managing dynamics internally within the ANC. So they worry about themselves and the positions they hold. They don't worry about society. And what happens to society? Society falls apart.
Our people are ready to vote for the ANC.
Election, though, as you've heard, has been marred by lower voter turnout.
People aren't voting because your options are like dog poo or like horse vomit or like, do you know what I mean? Like which flavor of like poison do I want?
They knew they could have gone to vote. They just chose to sit at home and watch TV. They're disgruntled. That's dangerous.
So I always say to people, find the political party that is least bad. Find the one that you most identify with and vote for them. But vote for someone and for something. Because if you choose to just not vote, that doesn't hold anybody to account.
Wherever the turnout is low, the ANC does really well. Where the turnout is really good, the ANC does badly. So our problem is turnout. People don't have anyone they can trust to vote for.
The conduct of our individual leaders, public perception that we are harboring corrupt cadres within the ranks of the movement have undermined public confidence out there.
What would you say to South Africans then? Because there is this growing disillusionment. Why should they vote for the ANC and still support the ANC, bearing in mind what has happened in the last few years?
Well, because of its ability to self-reflect, self-correct, and humble itself before the people, there is no other party in this country, including those that would have won power through coalitions, that have had the courage to stand before the people of this country, humble themselves where they've done wrong.
The election results must have hit home because for the first time, we've seen a shift ahead of the ANC conference in December.
Godfatherism in the ANC is dead. That's what I've argued. In the Zuma years, you would have a situation where Zuma lieutenants, in the form of an Ace Makashule in the Free State, or Supra Mahumapelo in the Northwest, or David Mabuza in Mpumalanga, would dictate how things would go from the branch level to region to provinces. I make the case that in 2022, you're not seeing that happen in the ANC.
We are in for a wild ride. The ANC elective conference always brings out the worst in the country. We are seeing jockeying for positions. We are seeing dirt being thrown. And I think that everyone needs to just buckle up and hold on tight.
What you see in 2022 is that nobody can dictate what should happen. There's a numbers game now. And so obviously the primaries, which is the ANC provincial conferences, have all taken place. And now there's an effort to say, okay, how much of numbers do you have? How much numbers do you have? And so it's going to be a game of political horse trading in relation to the numbers, the strength of numbers.
Currently incumbent President Ramaphosa seems to be heading the fray.
Even the faction that is against him they cannot offer someone who really can win the election for them ahead of 2024.
Nkosazana Zuma is not going to be able to deliver the victory for the ANC.
So do you think she's standing up because you need someone to stand up?
I think it's still the Jacob Zuma versus the Cyril Ramaphosa faction that are playing themselves out.
It will be important to see who else is nominated. We know that the presidential hopeful in the form of Zweli Mkhize to be on the ballot paper in December.
Could someone emerge from within the ANC that's going to just reshape this entire future?
No, it's not possible. Because of the nature and what the DNA of the ANC now is. These guys have to voluntarily agree that many of them must be arrested and locked up. Who would agree to that? I wouldn't if I was in that position. So, in fairness, we must not burden the ANC with unreasonable expectations.
Whatever happens in the ANC conference will set the stage for the 2024 elections. And given the economic crisis we find ourselves in, that doesn't augur well.
The ANC is in trouble, so expect to see another further decline.
Voters here in the video informal settlement share this disillusionment.
But when you go to vote, they come and promises. After vote, they'll sit in the office for another 5 years with that empty promises.
They want change.
I plan to vote, but for another government.
So if we don't have the right councillor from the ground, even if I can say what I want to see for this community, then that will never happen. If we still have those councillors who don't care about people.
This previous government is not doing nothing for us. What we are achieving from this government and what we experience is only corruption.
And I would also vote for the different governments that I'm in right now, because I'm not benefiting from it, and I believe no one in my community or any other community is benefiting, because what they do is just benefiting themselves.
If you are a voter and you vote the ANC over and over again into power, you are eventually going to go without electricity. In other words, the ANC is going to kill your state.
The ANC, however, claims it's been proactive about change.
We have introduced programs or policy undertakings that are responsive to the plight of our people on the ground. So our overall call to action is that making South Africa a better place for all.
And why should we believe you? Because we've got no time to play now. It's serious.
Well, because action speaks louder than words.
No, don't say that, because if we're going to say that, then we're going to go back and look at the past actions, and then we're going to say,
we don't have to go back. We've got to be forward-looking.
But there is no Messiah, no single leader who has the power to solve the complexity of the problems we face.
There is a brokenness of South African politics. South African politics on a municipal level, on a provincial government level, on a national level is broken. And we need to fix politics from the ground up. And so if we are to fall into this temptation to say, this man, whether it's an ANC president or a Democratic Alliance president or an EFF president, whoever the president will be, but if we think one man can fix all of the problems in South Africa, we're going to find ourselves in the same quagmire, trying in earnest to get ourselves out of this dark hole, but going nowhere.
But as things stand, there isn't an opposition party that looks to topple the ruling party.
So it's much harder for the opposition parties who have not been in government, because they don't have a record to demonstrate. You have to take their word when they say, this is what we're going to do. So how to demonstrate that they can do what they promise is that they must show who's their leadership. You can see these are people credible.
A coalition government looks inevitable.
The first scenario is the ANC and the EFF forming a coalition government. That is highly likely, because the two parties are the same. The EFF comes from the ANC, and in fact the EFF are the worst part of the ANC. They are actually kids who have mastered corruption in the University of Corruption, which is the ANC.
It needs to be completely different, or else South Africa cannot afford another 10 years of policy uncertainty, another 5 or 10 years of economic downturn.
The second possibility, it's a coalition of, in the main, 4 parties: the DA, the IFP, the EFF, and the Action SA. These possibly can form a coalition in 2024. They will have to sort out their differences, especially the DA and the EFF.
There's also the Electoral Amendment Act that's taking place that will allow independent candidates to contest. That's going to be something that one has to watch for the 2024 elections, because an independent candidate can then be a deal maker.
Coalition politics. People say that's the future and that we must get used to it and we need to learn to work with each other.
Are you going to learn to live with a government that only leads for 6 months, and then just before they finish a year, the speaker is removed because they cannot consolidate their own unity?
But that's a rhetoric the ANC is using, right?
No, it's not us. Must be careful. One day people are just going to go to the streets and say we don't have rain. It's because the ANC stole money for the rain.
And my answer to that is, how many ANC municipalities are under administration? They're not in coalition governments. They are unable to do their work. They are completely dysfunctional. It's not about the structure of the government, it's about the people who are governing. My absolute conviction is that South Africans don't trust individual parties as much as they used to. And you see it with people splitting their vote in the ballot. And they're now in a space where they want political parties to hold each other accountable.
I think that there needs to be broader conversations around what comes next for our democracy, beyond the scenario where you had this massive political party called the ANC, and you had its opponent, the Democratic Alliance, and then smaller political parties. I think now we are entering a new phase of our democracy.
We need a strong justice system, a great police system. We need effective accountability, and we need people who can actually say, okay, we caught you, you're responsible, we attach you assets, and we're locking you up. We need to show that kind of stuff. We need more people in orange overalls. When that happens, people will take the country seriously.
What's the 3 things that a party should have on their manifesto that would convince anybody to vote for them?
Corruption is number 1, because I call corruption traitors and anti-patriots, and it destroys the soul of the nation. Number 2, security. Once you have security, people will be more stable and number 3, job creation.
And if we want to save our country, bring it back from the brink, the onus is on us.
South Africans need a mindset change. You see, all these years we left it, government will do this, government will do that, government will do that. The country does not belong to the government. It's not their country. It belongs to me, to you, and 65 million South Africans. When something belongs to us, we take ownership, we look after it, we fix it. The concept of active citizenry is critical.
Our attitude needs to be, we are taking our country back. We're taking our democracy back from the political parties and the politicians.